When cracks appeared on the pontiff's lips and his breath began to smell of iron, the monks remained silent. When he began to tear out his fingernails, bite his wrists, and drink water from the palms of an unknown woman in black, no one intervened. And when he vomited on his red robe during midnight mass, it was already too late. The death of Pope Innocent VIII did not come suddenly. It crept up slowly from within. First there was a tremor in his fingers. Then his speech became slurred. Then came ulcers on his tongue and back, dry vomiting, black urine, and an unbearable smell emanating from his bed. He was not dying, he was rotting, and the whole Vatican was rotting with him. The servants first suspected something was wrong at the end of February, when the Pope refused food. He did not eat for 3 days, and then suddenly accepted a nun from the Order of St. Clare, a woman named Angela, whom no one had ever seen before. From then on, only she was allowed to bring him food and water. It was said that he drank from her palms and thanked her. Witnesses claimed that she had hands with dark spots and a smell of burnt iron, but she entered his chambers unhindered by personal order. The Pope stopped getting out of bed. He began to experience sharp pains in his stomach, convulsions and bloody discharge. The doctor who was allowed to see him briefly wrote, "His skin is turning grey. The whites of his eyes are yellowish. A mucus with the smell of honey and rotten eggs is coming out of his anus. His nails are peeling off. There is no imperial fortitude left in his body. His body is like rotten wine bursting from within." They began to bleed him. They let him bleed 4 times in 2 days. Then they applied bandages with vinegar, rubbed in an ointment made from crushed clay and a tincture of bee wings, all to no avail. He was suffocating, his chest groaning like a blacksmith's bellows. At night he asked for a nun to be brought to him. According to the valet's reports, he took her by the hand and whispered, "A little more, you're close, I'm almost clean." The servants refused to clean his chambers. The smell was so bad that one of the young brothers fainted at the door. The bed was changed twice a day, but the sheets were burned afterwards. They could not be washed or cleaned. Everything that touched the Pope's body began to rot, as if infected by a single touch. The pontiff no longer spoke of faith. He was silent. Sometimes he repeated aloud, "Do it right, do it to the end." No one knew to whom he was addressing himself. The nun who left the room never answered a single question. Her eyes were white, the veins in her neck were swollen. Some of the servants claimed that she did not eat, drink, or pray. One of the guards who saw her disappear into the corridor later said, "She left like smoke, without a sound, without a trace." At night, moans, sounds of vomiting, and screams could be heard from the chambers. Several monks said they heard someone laughing through clenched teeth for an unnaturally long time. Soon animals began to die. Mice and pigeons living in the attics were found dead with their entrails torn out. The court apothecary who tried the leftovers from the Pope's room fell ill on the 3rd day. He began bleeding from the nose, his kidneys failed, and his throat swelled up. He died in agony, from the report of the Bishop of Perugia. The Pope refused all visitors. He was locked up. Only one doctor, a nun, and 2 bodyguards remained inside. By morning both bodyguards had fallen ill. One shouted that he had seen His Holiness's body go mad. It was madness, but it was growing. By mid-March, the entire court knew that the pontiff was dying, but no one knew what was causing it. His flesh was swelling. Blood blisters were opening on his feet. His groin area had turned black. One eye was cloudy, the other was running. His tongue swelled up, and he could no longer speak. When the archbishop entered the room demanding confession, the Pope waved his hand and turned away. This was recorded by one of the guards. The archbishop cried as he left the room. He was not allowed to return. The pontiff did not die quickly, he suffered. For the last week he was kept on a diet of poppy seeds and hemlock root. He was barely breathing. His skin was peeling off his bones. His urine was bloody foam. One by one the doctors refused to treat him. One wrote, "He was a leper from the inside. His insides seemed to have a life of their own. It wasn't his heart beating, but a mass of fear tangled in his intestines." On his last night, he took a nun's hand, placed it on his lips, and died. After Pope Innocent VIII's death, his body was left untouched for almost a day. The room was locked, the servants refused to enter. 2 monks on duty at the door said they heard a faint scraping sound inside, as if claws were scratching the floor. One of them later died of suffocation, his face turning blue and his throat swelling as if something was growing inside him. The second was sent to a monastery near Rome. He was found a week later, silent, not eating, his eyes unblinking. His palms had burn marks as if from hot oil. The Pope's body was bloated, the smell was stronger than any other death in the palace. The horror was that his insides had already begun to decay before he died. According to the report of the physician Guido Savarini, the abdomen was liquid to the touch, with bubbles and a warm, mobile mass under the skin. After death, swelling began. The tongue fell out of the mouth, the jaw was locked, and the eye socket burst. According to the pharmacist who opened the door the next day, a murky liquid was oozing from under the shroud. The air in the room was like it had been taken from a coffin. The metal had turned black. All the walls were wet with moisture and something greasy. It took 2 hours to remove the body. None of the servants agreed to approach it. The Inquisitor brothers had to be called. They wrapped the corpse in 2 layers of cloth rubbed with tar, but this did not help. The cloth remained wet under their hands. The smell was unbearable. Ulcers protruded from the skin, pus dripped from the fingers. There were cracks on the forehead. According to one of those present, the neck was held by the grace of God. The pontiff was placed in a stone sarcophagus, but not immediately. First, the body was washed 3 times with vinegar, then it was rubbed with charcoal powder and smeared with resin. After each action, the remains of the ointments boiled up as if on a hot stove. The body continued to emit heat for 2 more days. Embalming did not take place. The monks refused to cut open the abdomen. It was pulsating. From an anonymous report dated April. On the 4th day after his death, at midnight, the sarcophagus was sealed, but there was a smell in the church as if skin was being roasted. The liturgy had to be held outdoors. One of the priests fainted while trying to read psalms next to the coffin. The woman who called herself Sister Angela disappeared. She was not found in any monastery. There was no record of such a nun in the register of the Order of St. Clare. No one knew her. Her body was never found. One of the archivists later noted in a personal note, her hands were not human. Her skin was like paper. The Pope drank from them. It was voluntary. The political situation within the Curia became extremely tense. The cardinals were divided. Some accused each other of collusion, the other demanded silence. Documents about the illness were confiscated. The doctors received compensation and disappeared. 2 pharmacists died within a few months, one from suffocation, the other from gangrene of the face. The official version of the Pope's death was natural exhaustion of the body in old age. No mention was made of ulcers, pus, or convulsions. However, a year later, an anonymous priest from Siena wrote a treatise entitled On the Rotten Top, in which he said, without naming names, he did not take the poison by accident. He drank it with faith. He wanted his flesh to perish and his spirit to depart in peace. He trusted the one who brought not salvation but transition, and he gave thanks. The figure of Innocent VIII became a symbol of apostasy. The Pope, who accepted poison with gratitude, ceased to be a saint. His name was no longer mentioned in prayers. His images were removed from the walls. One monk wrote, "We did not bury our father, we buried fear." By the summer after the death of Innocent VIII, the Vatican had changed. Not outwardly, the walls, columns and altars remained the same. But people began to speak more quietly, candles in the chapels were lit later than usual, and the smell of incense could no longer overcome the inner cold that had settled in the stone corridors. The servants who lived on the 3rd floor of the Apostolic Palace complained that at night they heard a creaking sound, as if a wooden chest was opening and closing by itself. One of the brothers claimed to have seen a woman in black robes coming out of a closed crypt near the cathedral, and on her hands was something like a crown of ashes. The pontiff's closest associates scattered after his death. Cardinal Del Fiore, who had signed the order allowing the nun into the papal chambers, was found strangled in his bed. On his chest lay a palm cut out of bread and covered with honey. The servants swore that 2 days before his death he had refused food and said, "She is waiting for me." No written will was left. His property was confiscated and burned. His ashes were buried without a liturgy. Meanwhile, the belief spread among the townspeople that the Pope's death was the beginning of a purification through decay. The first secret preachers appeared, declaring that the body of the high priest must rot to the ground so that the church may be resurrected in a new form. These were early forms of internal heresy based on the idea of voluntary decay as a form of redemption. By the end of the summer, 3 monks were found in the vicinity of the Lateran Hill, dead of starvation, with ulcers on their stomachs and black bandages over their eyes. Each had a plaque on his chest, "I accepted as he accepted." The church leadership did not respond officially. However, the Inquisition's documents for that year contain a reference to the systematic elimination of persons associated with the former ritual and suspected of sympathizing with the putrid doctrine. This primarily concerned the brothers who were physicians and cared for the pontiff's body. All 6 were sent to different abbeys. 3 died of internal heat. 1 went mad and cut his legs, believing that poison had penetrated his bones. Doubts arose about the cause of death. Cardinal Ancona, who disagreed with the official version, ordered a secret re-autopsy 9 months after the burial. But the sarcophagus was found to be partially destroyed. The stone had been broken from the inside. The body was missing. The report states only, "The place where the remains should be is empty. The stone is warm. The surface is damp. The inside of the sarcophagus is stained with a brown layer. There are no signs of decomposition. There are no traces of a body." After this discovery, the cardinals gathered. It was decided not to open the crypt again. The entrance was bricked up, but rumours spread. People said that Innocent had not died, but had gone into silence, that he was living underground, where he was decaying endlessly because he had accepted poison with joy without confessing. These rumours were fueled by some priests, especially from Tuscany, where people began to record strange dreams about a man with twisted hands who asked for water from the palm of his hand. Security was tightened at the palace. All new monks and servants were subjected to a 3-stage screening process: loyalty, physical purity, and renunciation of rotten teachings. Anyone who ever mentioned Angela's name disappeared. One novice, found guilty of keeping a note with her description, was burned behind closed doors. He was not allowed to confess. Politically, this was a turning point. After the death of Innocent and the outbreak of fear, the papal throne fell under the control of the most ruthless faction for a long time. Cardinals who feared the corrupt cult strengthened the power of the Inquisition. In the first 2 years after these events, more than 200 people were burned, most of them for uncanonical perception of the body as a vessel of decay. New rites of ablution and aromatization were introduced, as well as the mandatory closing of the coffin for 6 hours after the death of any church official. Innocent disappeared from all icons. His portrait was burned in St. Peter's Basilica. His name was erased from the liturgy. The official chronicles stated, "His service has ended naturally." Only in one letter, written in late autumn by an unknown monk from Amalfi, did the following line remain. He drank poison from her palm, not out of fear. He believed it was deliverance, but from what exactly, we did not understand. By the 4th anniversary of Innocent VIII's death, not a single church official remained who publicly acknowledged their involvement in his final days. The monastic brotherhood that had been involved in the funeral disappeared from the monasteries. Of the 6 cardinals close to Innocent VIII who had signed the decree allowing the nun access, 5 died in unexplained circumstances. The 6th, Armano Doriani, disappeared on his way between Avignon and Rome. His carriage was found on a mountain pass without horses, and his body was disfigured, with his tongue torn out and his stomach cut open, inside which a piece of cloth was found with the letters "Accepted" embroidered on it. By order of the new Pope, Alexander VI, strict control was imposed in the Vatican over all references to Innocent. His correspondence was confiscated, frescoes depicting him were painted over, and his name was no longer mentioned in the papal list. The official wording was non-canonical termination of service. This was a very rare expression, never used before or since. Nevertheless, rumours did not disappear. In the suburbs of Rome, especially among the lower clergy, fragments of the so-called La Donna prayer began to circulate. It sounded like a distorted version of a penitential canon, but instead of addressing the Lord, it addressed "She who brings bitterness and liberation." One version of the prayer included the words, "Accept my stench as a sign of entry." This provoked the wrath of theologians. Secret commissions of the church identified more than 100 cases where hermit monks voluntarily tortured themselves with rot. They refused food, rubbed their sores with opium, and drank decoctions of rotting bread. All of them were arrested and sentenced to purification by fire. From the report of the Inquisitor, Benedetto of Spoleto, those who believed in the palm said, "He accepted it and became empty. We also want to dissolve in it. I saw that their bodies were covered in sores, their breath sweet as that of a corpse. They called her not a woman, but a vessel, and the Pope was not a saint, but the first of the rotten." The Senate of the Papal States discussed closing the crypt of Innocent forever. The stone that sealed the sarcophagus cracked. Several monks reported that the smell of incense did not linger in the chapel. Once at midnight, the candles on the altar went out simultaneously. After that, the entrance was sealed with wax and the doors were sealed with 7 signs. The guards were not priests, but guards who were forbidden to pray at this place. Politically, Innocent's death was a turning point. His humiliating decay, his silence in confession, and his voluntary acceptance of poison gave rise to a new wave of fear. The Church strengthened its power through repression. With each passing year, the requirements for the body of the deceased Pope became increasingly harsh. Mandatory immediate embalming, autopsy in the presence of witnesses, and a ban on contact with outside nuns. After Innocent, a decree was issued. No woman was allowed to enter the Pope's private chambers during the last 7 days of his life, even if she was ill. And yet, despite this control, the cult of the accepted continued to exist in the shadows. Signs carved with fingernails were found on the walls of rural churches, a palm from which liquid was dripping. In monasteries, the delirious dreams of the sick were recorded, about an empty throne and a voice whispering, "You too are rotting, and this is the way." One priest in Naples, before his death, cried out, "She came to me, I feel my fingers falling off." Thus ended the story of Innocent VIII, the pontiff who voluntarily drank poison, trusting the hands of strangers. His death gave rise to a movement that purified the church for decades. His name was not cursed, he was simply removed, like a sore without explanation. But the rot that began in his body penetrated deeper, into the flesh of the Vatican, into dogma, into fear. After him, every pope died faster, not because it was easier, but because no one wanted to give thanks anymore.